let me share with you a chilling experience that happened to one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, Mark Ruffalo. This is a story that he himself shared in the past, and today I'll be telling it to you. Mark was shooting for a new movie, and the location was quite unique. An old abandoned film set far away from the bustling city. The set was known for its eerie atmosphere, but no one took it seriously. It was just an empty place, right? But things didn't turn out to be that simple. As the production team arrived, Mark couldn't help but feel a strange energy in the air. It was the kind of place where the silence seemed louder than any noise. The building where they were supposed to shoot had a long history, one that carried whispers of untold stories. And soon, Mark would discover that those stories were not just rumors. But before we dive deeper into Mark's unsettling encounter, if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss more true stories like this one. Let's get back to Mark's paranormal experience. The movie Mark Ruffalo was working on had a storyline that required a very specific location. After a long search, the production team found the perfect spot. An old, isolated film set that hadn't been used in years. It was a place that once saw the glory days of filmmaking, but was now covered in dust, forgotten by time. Mark and the crew drove out to the location, which was miles away from the nearest town. As they got closer, the road became narrower, winding through dense forests. There was something oddly unsettling about the path, as if it had been abandoned just like the set they were heading to. When they finally arrived, the first thing Mark noticed was the building's decayed appearance. It stood tall but worn out, like a ghost of its former self. The windows were cracked, the walls were stained, and the air felt heavy with history. It seemed as though the place hadn't seen light or life in ages. Despite the eerie feeling, the crew got to work, setting up for the first day of shooting. Mark, being a professional, brushed off the unsettling atmosphere and focused on the task at hand. But deep down, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something about this place wasn't right. As the first day of shooting progressed, everything seemed to be going smoothly, until the late afternoon. That's when Mark first noticed something strange. While rehearsing a scene, he thought he heard footsteps behind him. The sound was faint but distinct, like someone walking slowly across the old wooden floor. But when he turned around, no one was there. He shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just the old building settling, or maybe a crew member walking around out of sight. However, the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Later that evening, as the crew was wrapping up, Mark noticed something else. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow moving down the hallway. It was quick, just a blur, but it was enough to catch his attention. Mark paused for a moment, staring down the dark hallway, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. There was no one else there, and the only light in the corridor was flickering. It sent a shiver down his spine, but again, he tried to shake it off as nothing more than his mind playing tricks on him. But as the hours passed, Mark couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. The noises continued. Soft whispers, distant footsteps, and that unsettling shadow that seemed to appear just when he wasn't looking directly at it. Something about the set felt alive. By the second day of shooting, it wasn't just Mark who was feeling uneasy. The entire crew started noticing strange things around the set. It began with small, almost unnoticeable details. Equipment being moved when no one was near it. Lights flickering despite there being no issues with the wiring. And random cold drafts sweeping through the building even though all the windows were shut. One of the camera operators who had been working in the industry for years was the first to speak up. He mentioned hearing a woman's voice whispering his name while he was setting up a shot. At first, he thought it was someone from the crew playing a prank, but when he checked, there was no one around. His hands were trembling as he told the story, and everyone could tell that he wasn't exaggerating. The mood on set started to shift. People were on edge, and a sense of fear crept into the crew. Some tried to laugh it off, blaming the old building for the strange occurrences, but deep down, everyone was beginning to feel the weight of something unnatural lurking in the shadows. Mark overheard some of the crew whispering about the place being haunted. It seemed absurd, but the more they talked, the more it made sense. Rumors started spreading about the building's history, with one crew member claiming that it used to be the site of a tragic accident many years ago. Another claimed to have seen a figure standing at the window, staring down at them as they worked. Tension was growing, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this place than they initially thought. As the days went on, the crew's fear became harder to dismiss. Something was definitely wrong here, and the unsettling feeling continued to grow. The tension escalated when they had to shoot a critical scene late at night. The atmosphere was already thick with unease, but nightfall seemed to amplify everything. The set was dimly lit, and the silence felt almost suffocating. Mark had a scene where he had to walk through a long, narrow hallway, and just as they began filming, the temperature noticeably dropped. Everyone could feel it, like the air had suddenly turned icy. As Mark walked through the hallway, something bizarre happened. The lights flickered and then completely went out for a few seconds. In that brief darkness, Mark swore he saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was just a silhouette, but it was unmistakably human-shaped. His heart pounded in his chest, but when the lights came back on, the figure was gone. The crew rushed in, thinking it was a technical issue with the lights, but no one could explain what caused the blackout. While they were checking the equipment, one of the lighting technicians suddenly froze, pointing towards a window on the far side of the room. Everyone turned to look, and there it was, a shadowy figure standing outside, motionless. But when they ran outside to check, there was no one there. The air was still, the ground undisturbed. Yet everyone on set knew what they had seen. That night marked a turning point. Something more than just technical glitches was happening here, and whatever it was, it seemed to be getting stronger. After that night, Mark couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him. It wasn't just the strange occurrences on set. It felt personal, like whatever was haunting the place had turned its attention directly to him. One evening, after a long day of shooting, Mark stayed behind to rehearse some lines alone in one of the back rooms. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of dust and old wood. As he paced back and forth, trying to get into character, he suddenly heard a soft knock on the door. At first, he thought it was a crew member, but when he opened the door, no one was there. Shrugging it off, Mark went back to rehearsing, but moments later the knocking returned. Louder this time. It was coming from all around him, like the walls themselves were alive. He looked around, but the room was empty. Just as he was about to leave, something even more chilling happened. He felt a cold breeze brush past him, and then, in the corner of the room, a shadow started to form. At first it was faint, but then it grew darker, almost solid, as if someone, or something, was standing there watching him. Mark's heart raced as he stared at the figure, unable to move. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but the weight of its presence was overwhelming. In that moment, Mark felt a sense of dread he had never experienced before. He quickly gathered his things and rushed out of the room, but the feeling stayed with him. It wasn't just a trick of the mind, something was there, and it wasn't leaving him alone. From that point on, Mark couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just a haunted building. Whatever was haunting it seemed to be following him, and it was getting bolder. Mark wasn't the only one feeling the effects of the strange happenings on set. As the days passed, the other actors began sharing their own unsettling experiences, and it became clear that everyone was on edge. One of the co-stars, a seasoned actor who had never believed in the paranormal, started acting unusually jumpy. During one scene, he froze mid-dialogue, staring at something just off-camera. When the director called cut, he admitted that he'd seen someone standing in the shadows behind the crew. But when they checked, there was no one there. Another actor, a young actress new to the industry, became so overwhelmed with fear that she refused to stay in the dressing room alone. She mentioned hearing whispers like someone was calling her name from the dark corners of the room. It became so bad that she insisted on having someone with her at all times, even during breaks. The more they talked, the more they realized they were all experiencing something similar. Unseen presences, strange noises, and cold spots that seemed to follow them wherever they went on set. One actor even claimed to have seen his reflection in a mirror, but instead of his own face, he saw a gaunt, pale figure staring back at him. The once professional environment on set started to crumble. No one wanted to admit it outright, but the fear was becoming palpable. Every little noise, every flicker of light sent a wave of panic through the cast. Some even began discussing whether they should quit the production altogether. Mark, while trying to remain calm, knew that whatever was happening wasn't just in their heads. The unsettling energy surrounding them was real, and it was affecting everyone. As the days went on, Mark began questioning his own sanity. He tried to rationalize everything, telling himself that it was just the stress of shooting in such a creepy location. But the more he tried to convince himself, the more bizarre things became. One night, after wrapping up late, Mark decided to walk back to his trailer alone. The path was dimly lit, with only a few scattered lights guiding the way. As he made his way through the dark, something caught his eye. A figure standing just beyond the last light, barely visible in the shadows. It looked like a person, but its posture was unnatural, hunched over, with long, twisted limbs. Mark froze, his heart racing. He blinked, and the figure seemed to vanish like it had never been there. Shaken, he continued walking, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. But as he neared his trailer, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Slowly, he turned around, expecting to see someone from the crew, only to find nothing but darkness. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure from the shadows. It haunted his dreams, appearing just out of reach, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The next day, during filming, something even stranger happened. Mark was in the middle of a scene when he suddenly saw the same shadowy figure standing just behind the camera. He stopped mid-scene, his eyes wide with fear, but no one else seemed to notice. When he finally asked the crew if they had seen anything, they all shook their heads. No one had seen the figure but him. Was it a hallucination? Or was he really seeing something that no one else could? Mark was starting to doubt what was real and what wasn't. The line between reality and the supernatural was blurring, and he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was seeing wasn't just a trick of the mind. Something or someone was reaching out to him from the shadows. As the strange occurrences became impossible to ignore, one of the crew members, an assistant who had grown up near the area, decided to dig into the history of the old set. What they uncovered only added to the growing sense of dread. The assistant found records that revealed the building had once been a popular filming location in the early days of cinema. However, it had been abruptly abandoned after a tragic incident. Decades ago, during the shooting of a low-budget horror film, a freak accident occurred on set. A young actress, only in her 20s, had died under mysterious circumstances during a late-night shoot. Her death was ruled an accident, but locals had long whispered that something far more sinister had happened. Rumors of hauntings followed the tragedy. Many believed that the actress's spirit remained tied to the location, unable to move on. Several productions attempted to film there over the years, but each one encountered strange, unexplainable incidents that forced them to leave. The set had eventually been closed off, abandoned to time and decay until now. Mark listened intently as the assistant shared the findings with the crew. The story felt eerily familiar, as if the events they were experiencing were echoes of the past. The actress had died tragically, just as the rumors suggested, and now it seemed like her spirit, or something else, was making its presence known once again. For Mark, the history only deepened the unsettling feeling that had been following him. This wasn't just a haunted building. They had awoken something that had been dormant for years. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous it felt to stay. But by now, it was too late to turn back. After learning the chilling history of the set, Mark and the crew realized they needed to do something to protect themselves. The assistant, who had dug up the history, mentioned a local legend tied to the tragedy. According to the story, the actress's spirit could only be put to rest by acknowledging her untimely death and performing a specific ritual of remembrance, something that had never been done after the accident. Desperate for answers, Mark and a few crew members decided to follow the local advice. They reached out to a nearby historian who specialized in paranormal occurrences, hoping to find a way to calm the restless spirit. The historian confirmed the story and told them about the ritual, a simple yet deeply symbolic act that involved lighting candles in the very room where the actress had died, while reciting a few lines in her memory. The crew gathered late that night preparing for the ritual. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and even those who didn't believe in ghosts felt a sense of foreboding. Mark, taking the lead, entered the room with a few others, carrying candles and the script given to them by the historian. As they began to light the candles and recite the words, the temperature in the room plummeted. The air grew heavy, and for a moment it felt like time itself had stopped. Mark's hands trembled as he spoke the final words, asking the spirit to find peace and move on from this place. Just as they finished, the candles flickered violently, and for a split second, Mark thought he saw the faint outline of a woman standing in the corner of the room. She wasn't menacing, just watching, as if waiting for something. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The room was silent, and for the first time since they arrived, the unsettling presence that had been hanging over them seemed to lift. It was as though the building itself had sighed in relief. They hoped that finally the spirit had found peace. As the ritual concluded and the room fell into an eerie silence, a strange calmness settled over the set. For the first time in days, Mark felt the heavy weight of fear lift from his shoulders. It was as if whatever had been haunting them was finally letting go. The temperature returned to normal, the flickering light stopped, and the strange noises, those footsteps, whispers and shadows, ceased. But just as they were about to leave the room, something unexpected happened. Mark, who had been standing near the doorway, suddenly felt a hand rest gently on his shoulder. He froze, his heart pounding, certain that it was another manifestation. But when he turned around, there was no one there. The air around him felt different now, lighter, less oppressive. For a moment he stood still, breathing deeply, as if waiting for something to happen. Then, from the corner of the room, he heard a soft, almost imperceptible voice. It wasn't the harsh, chilling whisper they had all heard before. It was a quiet, peaceful tone, almost like a thank you. Mark's eyes widened as the room seemed to brighten, and he realized that the spirit of the actress had finally found peace. It wasn't a dramatic, terrifying moment of supernatural release. There was no loud bang or sudden appearance of a ghost. It was a quiet, subtle shift, as though the building had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Mark slowly turned and nodded, almost as if acknowledging that the story had come to an end, that they had made it through. The crew members gathered outside, one by one, feeling the same sense of relief. There was no more fear, no more tension in the air. They knew the haunting wasn't gone forever, but it seemed to have calmed, just long enough for them to finish their work. As they left the set that night, Mark couldn't help but feel that they had done something important, something that had broken the cycle of fear. The events of those days would never leave his memory, but for the first time since arriving, Mark felt at peace. The set, though still ancient and eerie, had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Whatever had happened, they had survived, and in a way, so had the spirit. In the days that followed, Mark couldn't shake the haunting experience. Despite the calm that had settled over the set, the events left an indelible mark on him. He found himself reflecting constantly on what had transpired, trying to make sense of it all. The rational part of his mind insisted it had been a combination of stress and overactive imagination. But deep down, he knew what he had experienced wasn't just a product of his mind. There were moments, especially when the set was quiet, that he would catch himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again. But each time he reminded himself that whatever had haunted the set had been laid to rest, and he had played a part in it. The experience changed something in Mark. It made him more aware of the unseen forces that exist in the world, the things we can't always explain. He wasn't sure if he believed in ghosts before, but after this, he couldn't deny that there was something beyond the visible world that defied understanding. It also made him more appreciative of the people around him. The bond that had formed between him and the crew through their shared experience was something he would never forget. They had all been through something together, something that transcended the usual boundaries of filmmaking. As the shoot continued, Mark could tell that the set was no longer just a place of work. It was a place where something extraordinary had happened. The experience had left its mark, not just on him, but on everyone who had been part of it. And while the fear had subsided, the memory of the haunting would stay with them, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the supernatural. In the end, the filming wrapped up without any further incidents. The crew finished their work, and the set, once filled with tension and fear, slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Mark, though relieved, couldn't forget the strange events that had unfolded. Even as time passed, there were moments when he would think back to the shadowy figures, the whispers, and the chilling presence that seemed to follow them. But in a way, the experience had transformed him. It had made him more attuned to the mysteries of the world, more open to the possibility that some things simply couldn't be explained. The haunting, in its own way, had served as a reminder that there are forces beyond our control, forces that, while invisible, can still have a profound impact on our lives. As for the crew, they went on with their lives, but the bond they had formed during those tense, unsettling days remained. They often talked about the experience, sharing stories and reflections, each of them processing it in their own way. Some still laughed it off, while others admitted they couldn't shake the feeling that something had truly been at work on that old set. For Mark, the events remained a powerful part of his memory, a reminder of a time when reality seemed to blur with the supernatural. The haunting may have ended, but its impact would stay with him forever, shaping how he viewed the world, and the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of what we can see. If you enjoyed this chilling story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more spooky tales. Do you think this haunting was real? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious and watch out for what's lurking in the shadows.